It is my great privilege and pleasure to introduce this session called Dialogue Across Differences. And the Dialogue Across Difference is a series that's part of a larger university activity called Values in Action. And the larger enterprise of Values in Action, and specifically the Dialogue Across Differences, is really how do we, through a series of conversations and interactions, create a sense of a community of both resilient and inclusive learners. And what we mean by that is ability to hear different perspectives, right? And to grapple with different ideas, even on the opposite side of a divide, with a sense of respect, understanding, and learning. So it's really founded in the very essence of what an educational institution is all about, is how do we learn and grow and develop over time. Now, we have already been doing this here at Columbia Business School with these two amazing individuals, Todd, Jick, and Usher, who have created a class called Bridging the American Divide, and really trying to understand at its source, in those locations where it exists in its most transparent form, a divide that is currently happening in America between, let's say, the right and left. And so what they have done in this class is try to help people go through a journey, and so they can understand where that divide comes from, but also understand ways that we might be able to bridge that American divide. Now, Values in Action is about learning. This class is about learning. And I think what's been most amazing about this class is that these two individuals have also learned. And so they're going to teach us today their learnings about learning to help you as learners be better learners. Bruce and Todd, everyone.
Thank you, Adam. Kind introduction. So it's a real pleasure to be here today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this course and how it came about, and we're going to talk about the lessons we learned from this course. We've been teaching this course for 7 years now. And the first thing I want to say is what's going on in the Columbia campus today and the divides that we're experiencing here at Columbia University and more broadly across the country and around the world are very deep and very challenging. And there is no way that what we have learned from this course allows us to easily cross those divides. No chance. What it might do, though, these lessons, is allow us to begin the process of making it a little bit easier to cross those divides. That's what we're trying to do here, okay? But let's recognize that right off the top that this is, we find ourselves in a very, very, very challenging times. So let me just start with the genesis of the course, because it's revealing to how we ended up where we are today. There was a talk that was given on November 3rd, 2016, between our then Dean Hubbard, who teaches here, and Professor Ray Horton, who has since retired. And the talk was on the rise of populism in America. Okay, if you look closely at the date, you'll notice it was 5 days before the 2016 election. And during that talk, Professor Hubbard made a comment. He looked at the crowd. It was a big crowd, about 300 students back in horrible Uris Hall. And he said, our students really don't know what's going on in this country because they're unfamiliar with anything that's outside of the great cities in the country. Essentially, pretty much unfamiliar outside of the coast. He said, you know more about what's happening in Tokyo and London and Sao Paulo than you do know what's happening in the heart of this country. I thought it was an interesting statement. Didn't think about it until the following Tuesday. And the next day I walked into Ray Horton's office and I said, Ray, you're right, we got to do something about it. I don't know what's going on. Most of our faculty don't, and our students don't. And even those students who are from the parts of America that perhaps are much closer to what happened, you've left. You're now part of the elite, just by dint of being in Columbia Business School. So we put together this course. We started this course in 2017. It's the first time we launched it. And as Professor Jick he'll show you more about the course and how he takes students through it. But essentially 6 weeks of lectures followed by a trip mostly to Youngstown, Ohio, though we also have been to northern Alabama as well, to Decatur Alabama. And the purpose of the course is really quite simple. Americans are a deeply divided people. Interestingly enough, when Adam introduced us, he called the course Bridging the American Divide. That's what it was called when we started it. We thought it was the political divide. When we actually got into it, we realized there's a lot of divides in this country. So we added an S. It's now Bridging the American Divides, right? And the purpose of the course is to gain a better understanding of the causes and consequences of those divides and what you might help do to bridge it, right? So the most common question I get when I mention this course to, especially outside the business school, alumni and the like, they say, that's really interesting. Why do you teach that in a business school? What's the relationship to business? And the answer is that business leaders can no longer ignore these issues. Historically, you ran a business, social issues came up. That's not business, that's the role of government, nonprofits, civil society. Well, more and more business leaders are being forced to address these issues, whether they like it or not. This is an Edelman survey. Edelman does really interesting, I think, very accurate surveys. And we just see a fairly recent one from 2021. I expect CEOs to publicly speak out on these issues. So CEOs can no longer avoid these issues. Business leaders, and that's all of you are going to become business leaders, you don't really have a choice. You got to be familiar with these issues and figure out how you want to address them. So today, what I'm going to do today, I'm going to do a really brief introduction to the psychology of polarization and some first principles for constructive dialogue, very high level. Hand over to my colleague here, Professor Jick, talk about the common barriers we run into in trying to discuss these divisive issues and some best practices, techniques. There's a lot of expertise out there that we've brought into the classroom we're going to share with you. We've got a couple of alumni from the course, a few of you here in the room, and I'm going to ask you if you'd like to share your insights from the course and anything you'd like to say. And then we'll definitely open it up to general Q&A and anything you'd like to ask. We'll discuss from there. So let me just start off with the psychology of polarization, which is a super complex topic. And we spend an hour or more in the course on it. We're going to spend about 2 minutes today. But you have to first understand, why is it we're so polarized as humans? And I want to boil that topic down to really just one question. How can two people look at the same facts and reach different conclusions? How can two people become polarized on an issue? Okay. And we address this in the course. I just wanted to give proper attribution here. We invited guests from the Constructive Dialogue Institute. This is an institute that's affiliated with NYU and the work of Jonathan Haidt, who's a psychologist at NYU. Really thoughtful work they do. So if you're interested in learning more about this topic, look up the Constructive Dialogue Institute. But I want to answer this with just two understandings. There's two reasons that this happens. And the first reason is going to be pretty obvious to you. The first reason is that we reach our conclusions partially based on our lived experience. And our lived experience starts with the fact that we all share, when I say all, we're talking about all humans, we all share a common evolutionary heritage. Okay? But then we are shaped by our early childhood experiences, by our life experiences, and the culture that we grew up in. Right? This is pretty self-evident, isn't it? I would just add to this, though, that our lived experience is particularly shaped by our hardest won experience. If you've had a very hard experience or a painful experience, that will shape you more than the sort of easier experiences you've lived through, okay? So the first issue is that we have these different experiences, right? But then we also need to understand about how humans reach conclusions about issues. Now, many people believe, or assume, it seems reasonable to think, that if you're faced with a new issue, that you would step back and go, let me understand what's going on here. Let me research the facts, analyze it, maybe talk to some experts, and draw a conclusion. That's the way that we face challenging issues, isn't it? It's not. It's quite the opposite. Humans are wired to make most of their decisions based on intuition. And it's decisions that we make almost instantly, within a matter of seconds usually. Okay? And then what we do is we go out and find facts to support our intuitions. That's the way we are wired. It's completely backwards to what you think it is or perhaps should be. Okay? Now this way of reaching conclusions has served us really well as humans. You know, when we were faced with a saber-toothed tiger, you didn't want to go around gathering the facts. Is this thing a threat to me? I've never seen it before. First time it showed up. My intuition is run like hell. And later on I'll figure out, I'll talk to other people in my community. Yeah, did I really need to? Whatever. Maybe I wasn't even hungry, right? It serves us well. The problem is today in our very complex world, it doesn't serve us so well. Challenges that are very long-term, that are highly complex, say like climate change, which is the area I focus on, this human behavior works against us. Okay? So when it comes to polarization, our psychology of humans creates it because two people can look at the exact same situation, filter that through their lived experience, their life, and immediately jump to a different conclusion based on their intuitions. And then they find the facts to support their conclusion. And now they're polarized. They're in different places. Right? That's how we find ourselves so often in this situation. But what we also find, and this is what the course is about, is if two people who reach really different conclusions based on the same set of facts, if they were to discuss their conclusions, they might find some common ground. I say might. This doesn't always work, right? If they discuss it, they could find some common ground, and that's what Professor Jick is going to talk about. But before I turn it over to him, I just want to point out two things. The first is that this discussion is really hard to do, and we're really bad at it. And the number one reason we're bad at it, the number one challenge in having this discussion in our course and beyond, is that we're really bad at listening to understand. We're trained, in business school and everything else, we're trained to listen to respond. You tell me something, I'm going to really quickly analyze it, and I'm going to come back with my response. We're trained to win. We're trained to beat the other side, whether it's in business or in any other facet of life, right? So we listen to reply. And if that's the way you're listening, this discussion doesn't work. It only works if you're listening to understand. If you're listening to understand why that person drew that conclusion that's different from your own. So that's our challenge. How do we overcome that challenge? Well, the key thing we think about in the course, and the key thing we try to express to our students, that our building block is empathy. Empathy is trying to understand, why did that person reach that conclusion? What is it about their lived experience that brought them to that conclusion? It's not the same as agreeing with them. You can go through this whole discussion, understand, now I see why you have that conclusion, and I still fundamentally disagree with you. That's quite likely, quite possible. But maybe with empathy, you start to find, actually, we've got some common ground. So before I hand it over to Professor Jick, let me just give you one really brief example of this. Okay, it's a unique example. It's kind of unusual. But I just want to try to use it to sort of pull together what I've spent the last 10 minutes talking about. An example is immigration in America. So on one of the Bridge of the American Divide trips we had, this one actually was the one to northern Alabama. It's a city called Decatur, Alabama. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Decatur. It's a smaller city, 50, 60,000 people, very much a blue-collar, working-class city. And the first night we're there, the students and faculty, and we meet some people from the community. We have dinner together, a group. And one of the community members gets up. He's like a middle-aged white man. And the first thing that's out of his mouth is he says, I want you to know that we have too many immigrants in my town. What's your intuition tell you about this guy? Probably your intuition goes somewhere like, he's anti-immigrant. It might go, he's racist. Probably goes, he's xenophobic. And so on, right? That is likely this group, me, the reaction to that statement. The good news is, because we're all in this room, we're talking, the conversation keeps going. And he tells you more about why he's angry. What he's angry about is chicken. How many of you have a chicken sandwich today? Some of you got chicken sandwich, right? Yeah, a bunch of you. Yeah, it's really good. He's angry that you get to eat cheap chicken. The story is this. Decatur, Alabama, in the couple of years before we were there, this is 2019, by the way, just before the pandemic. A couple of years before we were there, a bunch of chicken processing companies had opened facilities in Decatur. Chicken processing is this business of taking a live chicken and making it into our sandwiches, right? It's a brutally hard job. The vast majority of Americans won't work in a chicken processing plant. And in fact, it's such a brutal place. It was one of the few factories where we could not no one would let us in to even look at one. So where do they find employees? They find employees in Central America. They'll open a factory. They'll get the news out in communities, very poor communities, in Guatemala and other countries. There's work. Come to America. And those people eventually make their way. And they settle in the community. And they take these really hard jobs. Decatur, Alabama went from essentially 0 immigrants to 20% of the population over 3 or 4 years. And what this individual, this angry guy, told us is, look, the school system is collapsing because now 20% of the children don't speak English. They don't even speak Spanish. They speak indigenous languages. We cannot find the teachers to teach them. We don't have the funds to pay those teachers, even if we could find them. The test scores in our schools are collapsing, and my kids are struggling. The healthcare system, our local hospital, is also collapsing. These folks get injured at work. It's a tough work. They get sick. They use the healthcare system. We can't keep up with the healthcare needs. And the tax base doesn't go up when workers are paid so poorly. He's angry, not at the immigrants, who, by the way, he went on to tell us he thinks they're great people. Work really hard, wonderful for the community. He's angry at the chicken processing companies who are allowed to do this and overwhelm this community and don't have to pay anything for it. Now we're on common ground. I understand business. I understand some of the trade-offs that come with business. We've got something to talk about. Doesn't mean I entirely agree with him, but I see the commonality of ground here. Now we've got something we can talk about, right? And this example, some of you may not conclude already, it's not unique to Northern Alabama, is it? Right? It's right here in New York City. You're starting to see people in a city that's historically really friendly to immigrants selling, pushing back. Not because they're anti-immigrant. They're angry at other issues that at the end of the day, maybe we can all agree on, or many of us could agree on. Right? So now let me hand it over to Professor Jick to talk about some of the common barriers we run into and the best practice techniques. Over to you, sir.
Great, thank you. Well, good afternoon to everyone. Those of you in the room and those of you in the other rooms. Those of you in the room will be participating shortly. Those of you in the other rooms can relax. You're in a much better position. Do you now know how to have constructive dialogue? Has Professor Usher sorted it out for you? Are we all set? Are we now ready to have dialogue across differences? We're just giving you a flavor of the course and some of these lessons learned from many years of teaching it. And indeed, it is hard stuff. And so my job is to talk about some of the hard elements of it, which is that there are barriers to doing this, some considerable barriers to doing it. And there are some best practices that we can learn from and that we try and teach in the course. And we've got Jules and Jeff and Alan, and I saw Justin, Yifan. There are five, six bridging students here who took the course in the fall, and there may be some in the other room. So for them, this is going to be a repeat. But for those of you who didn't take the course, hopefully we'll give you just some insights into some of the elements that we talk about in the course. And what a volume of divides, indeed, are in the course. And what a volume of divides face us in society. And we're just dealing with the American divides. Obviously, again, there's a much broader tapestry that Professor Usher referred to at the beginning. So we start with the already sobering reality that there's a lot of stuff out there to work on, and not easy to sort of figure our way through it. So we look at this tapestry, and we'll talk a little bit in a moment about some of the specific elements of it. And the barrier number one is we prefer avoiding all this stuff. We prefer avoiding it. And my guess is you as CBS students and we on the Columbia University broader campus know that the last 4 months would be a wonderful time to try and avoid all this. But we can't. But that's a natural instinct. So it starts with the fact that getting into this territory is not for the faint of heart. That's why there are two of us that teach the course. One of us couldn't do it alone. We'd always have to have a backup for each other. We do anything to avoid the conversation. We prefer not to kind of get into negative spaces. And if we were to consider having the conversation, the second piece of data said we're going to get very anxious about it. So here's the second element of it. Suppose we say we have to have these conversations, then we stress about it. And so to the extent it's forced upon you, or you want to have it, or you really, for good reasons, need to have it, you've got all these anxieties that go with it. You don't know how it's going to unfold, you don't know how the other person is going to respond, and you don't know whether you're going to be able to get your point across, et cetera, et cetera. You see all the elements. 66% feel sort of stressed or anxious. Now, just to double check if I'm in the right space, let me ask you the question. What are the other barriers? What makes it difficult to get into the dialogue across difference? That's the topic across the university. This is our version of it at CBS. What makes it so difficult? Give me two or 3 points. I'll take them from anywhere in this room. The other rooms I can't get to.
Basically, just meeting people that have a completely different point of view from outside the university.
So meeting people who have a completely different point of view, and the rest of that is you'd rather not?
Not necessarily, but for us moving here to New York, we see this part of the city.
Yes.
I haven't moved to Ohio. I've never been there.
I see. So we recognize that we're limited in who we associate with, and sort of reaching beyond that is not so easy.
That can be hard to find the right words, so that you just scare away from it.
Exactly. Find the right words. And what are we
words.
what are we fearful of?
Yes.
If we don't have the right words, we don't say the right words.
That you're seen as a person that you don't want to come across.
Okay, so your own self-image, self-esteem, your own self-confidence is sort of challenged. So do we even know what those right words are? I'm glad you put it with your hands this way. Was there one more? Yeah.
I was going to say, I think people are scared of being misunderstood and then vilified.
Okay. You get into these conversations, suppose it's taken the wrong way and you're misunderstood. So the fear of doing that. My friend Ming?
People choose to believe what they want to believe, so it's really hard to convince them to accept another perspective.
If we're going to have these conversations and they're a product of their own life experience, they're going to believe what they're going to believe, is it worth it? Am I going to come out of this feeling gratified in some way? Any others? We'll take a couple more. Yep.
Maybe you said people look at the same facts differently, but
Yes.
sometimes people also just have different facts.
And sometimes people have different facts because they bring the facts that confirm their life experience. Yes, indeed. So we don't have the same data that we're dealing with.
I would also say that people are sometimes a bit stubborn and just want to win the conversation.
And so we're inclined to want to win the conversation. We have been well socialized to basically try and win. So we want to get it right so that we win. And those are exactly at odds with the mentality that Professor Usher was implying and that I want to kind of firm up here. So all of this says we need a different way into this, and we need some different skills, and we need some different techniques, but we need a state of mind to allow us to get into these conversations. Now, I don't want to get this to be too personal. Do you know anybody who's unfriended somebody else because they don't sort of share the same kind of beliefs? Anybody? Yeah. Okay, so hands are going up. Now that wasn't, what's the obvious other question? Have any of you? And I know Facebook is yesterday. I know we don't use Facebook, so unfriending, whatever, some version of that, even if it's in real life, you unfriend. Any of you experience that? So we get to points at which we are actually making pretty dramatic choices about who we associate with. Because again, we tend to associate with people that we are closer to or more akin to. And that is not going to help us with the kind of work that we're trying to do in bridging the American divide. We, in fact, are committed in the course to trying to expose people to people, in fact, beyond their normal affinity group, and who may have life experiences and values that are quite different than your own, and may even bring yours into question. So there's a lot on that front. And there's also a sense, again, and I certainly, we all lived in this community through the fall, know that there have been a lot of tensions, and for a lot of people, they just said, you know what? I'm going to go home at night, or I'm going to turn off the news, or I'm not going to deal with this. I just want to, I'm overwhelmed, I'm fatigued by all of it. So those, again, are ways in which we cope that add to the barriers, Okay. Again, in a short session, I only have a few more minutes. I want to give you some hope. So quickly, the course itself that we teach, and those who are in the course can tell you about it. You can find the syllabus on Canvas and look more completely at it. But I just want to emphasize a few main points. We start in the beginning with what we're doing here today. You see in the second session it says causes of the divides. It's some of the work that Professor Usher just talked about from the Constructive Dialogue Institute, and what I'm going to talk about in a moment, which is how to have difficult conversations, the barriers that we just talked about, but some best practices. And that's the underpinning for the course, because then we get into all the divides, then we get into all the issues. And we want to go into it with a different frame of reference, because if we don't, we're going to be stuck with these very barriers that get in the way. So that occurs at the very beginning. Then we get into topical areas, immigration that we just referred to, education issues, race issues, healthcare issues, media issues, a variety of these points. It's the body of the course, and then we take our trip. And so the course itself sort of primes us to go out of our comfort zone, to go to places that we're sort of unfamiliar with, and we go to the center of the country. It's not quite the center of the country, but certainly what's considered flyover country. You got the two coasts. You fly over going coast to coast. What happens in between? Youngstown, Ohio. And Youngstown, Ohio sits in sort of the area between Pittsburgh, Columbus, and Cleveland there. And again, it's a very interesting state. Ohio is very much sort of a red state now, but it had been a little bit more blue, if not purple. And so there was a sense, again, of this being a very different place. More importantly, from a business school perspective, Youngstown was, with one or two other places in Pennsylvania, the seat of the steel industry. And the steel industry disappeared in the late 70s, and so it's the throes of what's called the Rust Belt or deindustrialization. That's another place that we're going. So while we are busy here at the B School, and those of you going to consulting firms, and those of you going to PE, figuring out how to make more efficient business around the country, the recipients of that are sitting in the Midwest, where we went, that have factories and that have places that are quite different. Ohio loves Donald Trump. We don't see a lot of signs around the B School of, we're at the very center of business loving Donald Trump. You don't see that sign here. You don't see an emptied out factory. Now, that was emptied out in 1989. It's called Republic Rubber. We went to visit it. We went to visit it because, again, we want to see what's called creative destruction here at the B School. Part of capitalism is creative destruction. Certain companies have to end their lives so that other companies begin their lives. What happens to the communities? What happens to the people in those communities? What happens to an entire city of Youngstown, Ohio, that has many sort of historical elements that are symbolized by the loss of a plant? And so even for many of our students in bridging, and for many of you who have never been in a manufacturing facility, we're in business. It's a key element of business, is also the hard material manufacturing. And we did go visit an EV plant, which is part of the future. So we got a flavor of different aspects of life in Youngstown. And we spent a whole afternoon with the United Auto Workers. It was around the time of the strike that they were doing, or broadly speaking, in the auto industry. This was not the auto industry has left Youngstown. But again, the flavor of people whose lives and life experiences are entirely different than most of our students. And to encounter them and talk about what their experiences were. And it ends up with their politics, it ends up with their communities, it ends up with their values. All of that gets exposed, something very different than the folks that we normally meet at CBS. Finally, we went to a flea market, How many people have been to flea markets? Enjoyable experiences, right? You go there, it's interesting goods. This happens to be not sort of used goods. Most of it is actually new goods, small businesses. But it turns out the founder and owner of the flea market is a guy named Derek McDowell. And Derek shared with us his life experience. And his life experience of why he founded this was not just, well, I thought, this would be a great economic opportunity to make some money and this and that. No, it was about the fact that he had his brother murdered earlier in his life at 14 years old. Another member of his community was murdered that he was friendly with. And the whole sense of sort of racism and systemic racism was so real to him. And he said, he could kind of find himself in the drug community or in varying ways, sort of getting sucked into that cycle and himself perhaps at risk. Instead, he wanted to find this constructive way of finding his way forward and built up this flea market. And we learned about Derek and his whole story. Again, not a familiar story to most CBS students. It's all a way of saying is that we wanted to widen the horizon. Your very point about going outside of our comfort zone, having experiences that were different, and in some cases maybe even having some difficult conversations, but more exposing ourselves to getting the understanding and appreciation for the fact that even decisions that we make as business leaders and will make as business leaders affect communities in significant ways. We drew upon the fact that there are organizations whose entire mission is in fact trying to figure out how to have more constructive conversations. The very theme of this week at Columbia University, the very theme of this session about having constructive conversations across differences. Many organizations, more than on this chart in terms of logos, their entire mission is figuring it out. Some of you may have been exposed to them. Listen First, living room conversations. The one we use the most is Braver Angels. We commend you, if you want to look at that, to look up Braver Angels, because Braver Angels gives us some very specific techniques. So now we're at the level of techniques and tools for being able to mitigate or counter some of those very barriers. Again, in a minute, just tell me where you have seen more constructive conversations. Think of situations in which you've seen effective dialogue across difference. What were the key success factors? How do we do this better? What do you think it takes to essentially have conversations across diverse kind of and different people? Give me three ingredients. One. Give me the second. We'll go back to the first. So there's one. Professor Ames will start. That's it. Trust is a big part of it. Yes, trusting somebody. Tolerance, very important. Listening, extremely important.
Respect.
Trust, tolerance, listening, respect. Empathy. Easy to do these things. Easy to say these things. Harder to do these things. Easy to say we have to have trust. How do you build the trust? Takes a long time to build it. How long does it take to lose it? Short time. All right, so it's not sort of symmetrical that way. So we theoretically know the conditions of it. But organizations like Braver Angels and what we tried to do in the course was prepare people to kind of practice this in some way, in a low-risk atmosphere in a university in our course. So I want to give you some of the things that I consider to be counterintuitive in what they suggest. I'll quickly go through this because I want to leave time for questions, so I've got about 5 more minutes. The goal of these conversations, an extremely important premise. It doesn't say the goal is to be sure we show those people who's right and who's wrong. And let's assume I'm right and they're wrong. So my goal is to be sure I get them on my page. The goal is to learn about others' experiences, feelings, and life experience, which is what Professor Usher was talking about. And in fact, that's an important kind of mental frame going into it, that you're prepared to kind of go into and say, I'm not here to convince you, which becomes the first thing to abandon. I'm here, in fact, to absorb you and better understand you. You have a sense of satisfaction that you've conveyed your own perspective. So you feel like I've also explained kind of a little bit of my own life experience. And thirdly, it says you discover some common ground if it's there. So if you do the first two, if you're open to learning from them and you're open to conveying yours in a non-threatening way, all that in the trust, respect, empathy, the elements you just talked about, you're more likely to succeed. But look at the first again. First expectation to abandon, that you can persuade the other person to change core attitudes and beliefs. Is that normal practice here at CBS? It's the exact opposite. Okay, our goal in life is to be sure that we explain to others what is right and what is wrong about what they have to say. That facts will be agreed on and logic follow consistently? No, you can't assume that. And thirdly, you can't assume that your conversation partner will match your openness. This is an important slide because unless you have these starting points, you're going to get yourself down the rabbit hole and have all the problems associated with these conversations. With that, a little tone setting. I've got just three slides on here I want to show you. Tone setting, listening skills, and speaking skills. Tone setting, let the other person know that you want to understand other perspectives better. So taking what Professor Usher said, taking what we said as the premise of the course, trying to understand other people's life experiences, let them know that. Let them know that opens up the possibility that they'll share. Asking permission to pose questions. So you're not posing advocacy or answers, you're posing questions. And lastly, offering something critical of your own side and crediting something positive about the other side. Very difficult to do because, again, we're socialized and trained to be able to win the argument, win the day. We have our wonderful negotiations course is about winning the negotiation. Somehow you do better than the other. So that's a little bit on the tone setting. So these slides, again, point to the real burden and the skill required to do this well. Let me give you these quick 5 pointers on practice speaking skills. Use I statements, this is how I see it, more often than truth statements, this is how it is. Okay, very subtle difference, but this is how I see it, as opposed to this is what it is. And when you do put it in those sort of very dogmatic terms, you're only going to strengthen the polarization. Number 2, mention an area of similarity or agreement. If there is some common ground, identify it. Thirdly, before expressing a disagreement, saying some version of I hear you. So at least let the other person know that their life experience and their point of view has been heard by you. Fourthly, if you feel very strongly about an issue, saying something about what life experiences have led you to be passionate about it. In the very first class in Bridging, we ask everyone to talk about essentially some version of why they're taking the course and what they might want to contribute to the course. And we've had tiers in those introductions because those introductions essentially tap into how I got to CBS or it was a sort of mini CBS Matters, but it was a way of people essentially saying, here's my space. Here's kind of what I'm about. And we start there because we want to have that be a valued starting point in the course and what we're going to do as we experience all these divides. And finally, softening flat-out disagreements by signaling first that your perspective is very different. This one is very close to home to me. So again, if something is very powerful for you, tell them why it's powerful. Again, not saying you've necessarily seen it that way because you haven't been in my shoes. But let them know kind of where your shoes have been. So all of these are subtle and not so subtle shifts in how we go about speaking. Let's go. I got 1 minute left. On the listening side, we all know, active listening. I mean, I've seen all of you in orientation, and I'm sure you got from varying faculty, and certainly from me, the notion of, again, we're going to have exchanges and discussions. You got to listen and follow where the discussion goes. All sounds great. What do you do to be a good listener? How do you demonstrate it? One is you paraphrase what you've heard somebody say. Listening is not I hear you. Listening is what did I hear? What did I hear? And it validates the other person if you're able to paraphrase back. 2, asking questions of the other versus loaded questions. And again, questions that are statements are not questions. It has to be a real question. And thirdly, listening for what's underlying the person's comments, their values and sort of beliefs or their life experience or whatever. That's listening. So it's not just hearing the words themselves. It's in fact being able to tune into them. And tuning into them demonstrated by paraphrasing, probing in terms of asking. One of the most important qualities that we're going to emphasize, and we do in the course, is curiosity about others who are different than you. We're more comfortable with the people we're more familiar with. But in order to work across differences, we've got to start with curiosity. So that's on the listening side. So we put all this together, and with the students in the course in the early class or two, we set out some norms for how we're going to operate. And unfortunately for Professor Usher and myself, there are witnesses to this. So if I haven't captured it right, please correct me if I'm wrong. But you see boxes there that speak to all this. Listen to understand, that Professor Usher talked about. I'm curious to know rather than a less aggressive tone. I'm curious to know in a less aggressive way, not to make assumptions, et cetera, et cetera. So you see these are ways in which we actually try and practice what we've been preaching. Practice a way to do this. Because again, it's not natural. And it's not even natural in the CBS atmosphere of our other classroom settings. So Professor Usher and I really do try and do something different. I want to close this portion, and then we'll open up for comments from the Bridging students and then questions from all of you, with the recognition that Professor Usher and I are not falsely humble. We are realistically and authentically humble to say This is very hard stuff, and we don't feel like we always live it ourselves, or that we can turn this into sort of magical, simple solutions or a little handbook. It's difficult not to want to change others. It's difficult not to see things through right and wrong lens. It's difficult not to let our emotions sort of overtake us. So our notion is, can we practice some of this? Can we find some preliminary ways, and can we have a visit to Youngstown out of the normal comfort zone in which we get to open ourselves up, lean into the experience of people who are different? Not everybody's different, but many people were different, and get to, as we say, perhaps some common ground and a starting point for bridging divides. All right, I'm at 117. I guess I leave you with a challenge, more broadly speaking. Most of you have not taken the course. The first years you might take it in the next fall. The second years, we're sorry you weren't able to take it. But we just say here, we want everybody coming out of the B School to have these kinds of principles about listening to understand, about developing some of this skill, because again, it's part of what businesses have to deal with, reaching beyond your affinity group, appreciating others' life experiences, humility and curiosity, and empathy authentically. So that's our kind of manifesto to our bridging students, and now to all of you present in this room and virtual and other rooms. And we certainly thank you for listening. Marina Lopez wrote this at the very end of the course on Yellow Dig, which we use in the course, and it seemed to sort of summarize the main takeaways. We seem to have forgotten how to respect and listen to people with opposing views on social issues, while we actually encourage those same type of discussions in business settings on how to grow revenue or how to innovate, advocate, data, all the other kinds of things. We don't feel personally threatened when someone disagrees on a business issue, but somehow all these other barriers come up when it comes to these tougher issues. So we should be able to have the same openness when someone challenges our view on a divisive social topic, truly listening to the other's point of view and backing up our own position. All right. Bridging folks, here we were on the last day of our trip to Youngstown. I'll turn it to Professor Usher to get a conversation for a couple of minutes with them, and then we'll open it up.
You heard from Professor Jick and I. Now you can hear from, we'll hold applause, because you're going to hear from some of the students in the course as and who made a very different perspective. You may not applaud us after what you hear from what they have to say. And Jeff, may I ask you in the back row there, any comments, anything you'd like to add to this conversation?
Look, I think you both touched on it. I'll be quick. I think that the listening to understand is one of the biggest takeaways for me, especially I found it that it was new for me when I identified with the concept that we were learning in class, like when we talked about racial divides or social economic divides. I felt like I knew those things. And so I wanted to comment. I wanted to be the first one to respond. But sometimes it's important to not only to listen to understand, but also listen to understand and process. And I got way more comfortable with saying, I don't have a response to that. I appreciate you sharing. I need some time to process, especially if it was a totally different perspective than what I was accustomed to or used to. So that's the one tidbit that I had.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And you make a great point. Sometimes the more expertise you have on a subject, the harder it is to just listen to understand, because you're like, I know this stuff. Boom, right? Alan has a different background from many in the room, a military background, and so you brought a different perspective into the room.
Yeah, so first off, though, I would encourage any first year to take this course. Professor Jick and Usher really put their heart and soul into this course. This photo right here, Professor Jick was also like dying with pneumonia. So like,
That's
literally,
not an exaggeration.
12 hours later, you were Presbyterian, so just we're really put their heart and soul into it. No, so I was right out of high school. I was in the Army for 8 years, and I was in the infantry. I ended up getting out of the Army in 2016 and came to Columbia for my undergraduate degree. And I remember Dean On said something to us during orientation. And it's a little bit of an extreme comment, but it speaks to what Professor Usher said about leaning into the experiences of people who are different, actually, like Professor Jick. He said that, if you go through your entire undergraduate career and have not been deeply offended, you've had a horrible education. A bit extreme, but I think it speaks to the fact that when you have an organization like Columbia where over 50% of the people here are from different countries, it's okay to encounter different beliefs, because those kind of help you it pushes yourself outside of your comfort zone. And, fast forward to 2022, it seems like we had gotten away from that a little bit at Columbia, but I think courses like this are really, kind of prime examples where you can engage with people on really thorny, very complex issues. and you're gonna be surrounded by a whole bunch of really empathetic students who will hear you out.
Yeah. Thanks, Alan. And I would completely, I think we have as a university gotten away from being uncomfortable in these conversations, and maybe a silver lining to the situation we find ourselves in today, which is not a great situation, is that we will rediscover that. Others who are in the course, I know Justin, Yifan, with thoughts? Yeah, countries. Go ahead, Yifan, then Justin.
Yeah, sure. Also, I would highly recommend this course to all the first years in the room. It's absolutely phenomenal. I think it's very hard to, like, the best side of education, sometimes it really shakes your deeply held belief, right? Before this, I was a Milton Friedman camp as maximizing shareholder value is the best business can do. And I still have been challenged. That notion has been challenged. I'm feeling myself becoming more and more empathetic to those who are impacted by these creative destruction on a weekly basis, and just turning more and more away from original what I believe hold to as universal truths. So that's just the best part of education. You immerse yourself in different opinions, and maybe you come out with different ideas.
Thanks, Yifan. Justin, yeah.
Yeah, so I think you brought up a really good point about the bubbles that we're in. So we're in an Ivy League school. A lot of us will go on to investment banks and consulting firms where you're surrounded by other people from coastal Ivy League schools. It's very hard to actually have these conversations. So a good way to kind of open your mind to this, we talked a little bit about this in the course, is just reading the news and finding pieces, like opinion pieces and news articles that are different from what you might currently read. So like look through a variety of publications. There's different things, like Ground News was a big one that Professor Jick brought up, which is an organization that brings different viewpoints from the same news articles. And it really helped you, the course really helps you understand just how to go about exploring differences of opinions where you wouldn't normally be exposed to them.
Yeah, expose yourself to media that you don't like, because they have a different viewpoint. You know, I force myself to read the Wall Street Journal op-ed now and then. We do have women in the class too. Okay, Jules, okay, you have your hand up, yeah.
I think while you were guys talking, I remembered, so when we were in Youngstown, one evening we go to a bar and some of the speakers came and we had some beers and we became friendly, extra friendly with the speakers. And at some point the speakers asked us, so what are you really doing here? Like, why business school, Columbia Business School students? Like, why did you lost? And I found myself like, it's a really good question, but in business school, we can take so many financial classes and we can learn another model and then do something else, but it's all kind of the same. This course is so unique, so just on top of what everyone else was saying about the experience and what you can learn from it, I don't know if there is any other business school that doing this kind of program, that giving you this kind of perspective, and it will be such a shame if you would go out of this doors would not experience something like this.
Oh, we're in trouble.
I'll just say, the purpose of this session was not to flog the course to all the first years, but to share learnings from. But I appreciate that. Thank you. No, Mac was one of the few students of the course who actually is from this part of the country. You know this area really well.
Yeah.
What's your takeaway from this discussion and the course? Right?
Well, all great comments, and I totally agree. That was such a fun night, meeting and building relationships with local business leaders, like super involved with like the local newspaper. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, about 30 minutes away from Youngstown, and I used to play hockey in Youngstown, but I never knew all the stories. This class, by far and away the most impactful at CBS that I've taken. As a native Ohioan, it like totally opened my mind to not like a whole nother world, just like a new way, just a whole new frame of like what America is and their perspectives on the divides, their perspective as, like, we probably confirmed some of their biases about us, but also I like to think we dispelled a lot, and then vice versa too. So it was such an amazing course, and I don't want to like do the same thing like pitching first year to take it. But it really is. It was super special.
Yeah. Thanks, Mac. Thanks for your contribution. We only have about 5 minutes left, but we'd like to take some questions.
Yeah,
Just
so-
open up to those who are not in the course and have questions or comments or thoughts.
I think recently there's been a lot of protests and communication regarding Israel and Palestine on the Columbia University campus. And I've been hearing from some CBA students that when they come up here to the business school to take classes, they feel like it's a neutral zone because we don't really discuss it. So I'm curious why you think this, or any hypotheses that you might have about why this specific population of students doesn't seem as willing to engage in that type of dialogue.
It's a great question. I don't have a clear answer for you. I did a talk, this part of this dialogue that was last week at the journalism school. Different panel, different topics, different students, let me tell you. Why that's different, I don't really know. I really don't. But I agree with you, it's very, very different. And I wouldn't just say the willingness to discuss these issues, but the perspectives are very different. I guess, and I'm going to just give you my personal opinion here on one point. I believe the business school, we see a slightly more centrist set of views than in many other parts of the university, where I think there's not a great deal of diversity along a lot of these issues. Okay? And I think it's easy to think you're discussing these issues when everyone around you feels the same way. You're not really discussing them. You're just shouting about them. True discussion is when you're with people with different perspectives and you get into the issues we talked about today. And I'm not sure that's really occurring anywhere on the campus today. And that's why the university launched this initiative, which I think is terrific. Terrific question. Yeah, sir.
What would be a reason for an international student to take this class, considering polarization is like a global issue at this time? But
why just America?
Yeah.
We struggle enough just with America. It's pretty hard. But I think, and Yafan, I think you experienced too, an awful lot of these issues are the same issues. They're the same issues globally, even in really different economic systems, or very different political systems. You get very similar divides, actually. And then the tools that we try to share on how to have those conversations, I think are pretty applicable in any language. So yes, we narrow it to the U.S. and we narrow even more to like one place in the U.S. that we're going to. They seem to, I wish it wasn't the case. I wish it was unique to America. It doesn't seem to be.
But we also have students in the course who come from different parts of the world, as apparently you do and others I'm sure is here. And we draw upon their parallels and their interests. And be it South America or Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe had a sort of comparable sort of Rust Belt. We heard from people in, I think it was Slovakia, which had sort of a big car industry, and they found sort of parallels. So we asked and encouraged people to make parallels to their own international backgrounds. But we, in terms of the focus of the course, we tried to go deep as we could in the American issue. And you saw how many divides we had to deal with as it was, and we never have enough time and space. So it's a question of that. I guess the second part of it is our premise is it's about business leaders for the future, many of whom will be in the American context, not all of whom, of course. And so we wanted to prepare them especially for the experience of dealing with divisive issues in the American context. But it's fair to ask the question, can we expand? We try and do it in other ways.
I know we're at time. If you need to leave, just don't be shy. Just head out. But should we take 5 more minutes?
Sure, let's take a couple
those who wish to stay,
questions.
we've got happy 5 more minutes. And I know, so you had your hand up for a while. Yeah.
I had a conflict in the fall with this class. I figured I'd do the 1 hour version of it.
Same time.
And I really try to take away like some of the listening and points and constructive comments. But something I kind of struggle with is kind of like to what you said, Professor Usher. It's like we can find the common facts, but I realize we don't have the same. People have facts that I thought things were facts are not facts anymore, right? Alternative facts, where the institutions of news, science, things that we thought was all real, So then when you start kind of going down those rabbit holes, I never know how to have those conversations because I'm like, I think we're fundamentally don't agree on what a fact is now.
Yeah. So I think there are situations where we're just like so different worlds. This probably doesn't work. But there's an awful lot of things that are facts that religion. We didn't used to cover religion in the course, and we realized religion is a really big part of America. Again, example of how the coast don't always see what the rest of America believes and feels. What are the facts around religion? A lot of people they would describe elements of the religion as factual. This God and this fact about this God. Others would say, that's not a fact, that's a belief. Right? I think you can lean too much into, well, it's got to be a scientific fact, otherwise we could never agree. We can talk a lot about religion and find common ground, even though the facts about one person's religion and another might be very different. So I think there are situations where, yes, it's just kind of hopeless at this point. But in many cases, when you sort of just don't get too attached to the facts as you see them, understand what is that person's lived experience, their culture, their religion exists, and what is it that brought them this particular set of conclusions. You might find common ground there.
I love your comment because you're as if you're taking the first class, and this is invariably what someone says in the first class, exactly what you said. There have to be facts. And we're just going to spend the course figuring out where those facts are. And we just say, well, let's hold that thought. And let's deal with the lived experiences first. Jules, now Jules is going to answer.
Yeah.
She was in the
I was
course.
just thinking about the last class and how you closed it with talking about how there may or may not be alternate facts, but there are absolutely alternate truths. And if we can zone in on understanding the truths of people through all the tools we talked about, active listening and empathy, that's where a lot of the connection can be, and that's where a lot of the energy and effort might be fruitful versus honing in on that backside. And I just remember when you said that, it felt like a little bit of a weight off your shoulders, right? If we can focus on truths and just accept that facts may or may not be different. They might be the same, but to our point, they might be different. And accepting that truths will probably be different for the rest of life, but it doesn't mean those people we can't connect with.
Yeah. Let me give you an example of that business school students really don't like by and large. The fact is that gun regulations reduce gun deaths. That's a fact. The truth is that some people like myself feel safer when guns are regulated. But there are a lot of Americans whose truth is they feel safer carrying a gun. That's their truth. And I've met people in the trips to Youngstown and Decatur who tell me, I feel unsafe except when I have a gun. That's their truth. The facts are not the issue. Take one more? I don't know.
Let's take one last one. Go ahead.
Thank you for doing this. So how have you ever found yourself in a situation where you think that dialogue doesn't really work? Some people's truth basically are afraid to the right, to the light before you have Nazis marching in America a couple of days ago. Yeah. How do you approach that scenario where others' truth are so?
I think there are situations where dialogue is not going to, in the moment, it's not an option. And I just want to recognize that.
And Braver Angels, which is this organization we admire that attempts to do this, does not go into situations like that. You essentially have to have some willingness to dialogue as a starting point. And in situations like that, you probably don't. You probably don't. So I don't think we draw some lines, which is I think what you're speaking to. We're trying to make the lines wider because we want to open up to areas beyond where we're comfortable. But there are certain places where either ethically or in terms of potential value, you really wouldn't want to have that conversation.
Do you think those areas are growing larger in America where you don't want to go? Are they staying the same?
Anecdotally, I think they're growing large everywhere in the world. But I can't say. But let me make the last comment. We're now really over. The last comment, just to your point. This talk is about dialogue across difference here at Columbia University. The problem we have here at Columbia is not Nazis marching or people truly being at risk of their life threatened, I don't believe. The issue is there's a lot of space here where we're not dialoguing. And we could be. Okay? That's the space we're trying to fill. And I think if we can just do that better than we've done, that would be a great accomplishment. Appreciate everyone's time. Thank you all for visiting. Thanks, everybody.